firstly, thank you so much, Jonathan, for connecting with us and being willing to share your experiences and your ideas. Because you have a background, I understand, in AI and in coaching and NLP. Is that right? Yeah.
Indeed. I would say my first career was in artificial intelligence. That was from 1991 until 1997, at which point I stepped aside from doing what's called knowledge engineering and began studying NLP initially to become better at knowledge engineering work,
Wow. Yeah.
and then found it to be another calling and sort of left that behind. So, yeah.
Well, so that gives you a unique way of understanding NLP as well, right? That's
It does very much. And just to be clear, the AI that I have a background in and experience in is quite different from the AI we are all enjoying today. The current generation of generative AI applications it just blows our minds. And it's wonderful and it's extraordinary. And there are dangers attached and there are excitement and inspirations attached. The applications are endless and it's a very exciting time. My particular perspective on AI as it pertains to NLP is from a very different approach to AI. At the time that I was involved in AI, we were doing more knowledge-based work. I mean, I would say neural networks, hybrid systems, uh, all kinds of genetic algorithms, that was all being explored at the time. But what was financially viable back then was expert system software. So, for example, anything transactional where you had people where companies had spent millions teaching these people to level the expertise up that they needed to make critical business decisions. We learned at the time how to model those people, replicate their decision making, put it into software systems, and then spread that knowledge across to hundreds of potential transactional employees. And that level of knowledge could then be applied wider. So I was doing that. I would go into companies and interview their experts, find out what they knew, how they knew it, and then replicate that decision making in what we would call knowledge bases.
wow. That
So
sounds so much like NLP, by the way.
it does absolutely right. So my perspective, it harkens to something that John Grinder recently said a few years back. He was on video and he said NLP's done some amazing work with the how. In other words, when you want to study somebody who's great at something, we're great at capturing the how they do it. But we've done not such a good job with the when. Like when do you apply what piece of knowledge? I'm going to tie this into some incredible work that, of course, you know well that Robert Dilts has done, which is to understand that beliefs can be mapped with a three-part structure of if, then, and means. Well, I was not conscious of the meaning aspect of things, but I was an expert in the if then. So I would capture all the if thens, sometimes as many as thousands of if thens from an expert, and then build software to replicate that. The means, the emotional driver of each of those choices was embedded in the work I was doing, but I was not conscious of it till many years later. The means was the title of the rule. So the why we would do something was encoded in the name of the rule. And then, of course, the rule would be the if this circumstance occurs, then we would do certain actions that would change the state of the world. And beliefs operate exactly the same way. So then I got exposed to Robert's work, and I'm like, whoa, blows my mind that there's this parallel between the work I'd been doing and, of course, mapping human decisions and human beliefs. Extraordinary moments for me, huge. And of course, Robert even used the words that these beliefs travel in packs. Well, I love that phrasing.
It's,
And whereas I think he did absolutely groundbreaking work with teaching NELPers, that's a technical term, right?
yep.
Teaching NELPers how to map those beliefs. Um, I had never done that. I had basically focused on just the collections of beliefs. So I see what hundreds or thousands of rules look like because I've done it, I've lived it, I've mapped it, and what it looks like is subclouds. It looks like not one cohesive body of knowledge that doesn't exist. But if I mapped your expertise in coaching or your expertise in training or in nursing, I would get like these little pockets of rules, like how do I deal with these five variants in that situation? And I'd get 10 rules over here. How do I deal with that situation? And and it's pre-programming for you in knowing how to deal with anything that gets thrown at you. Knowledge looks like pockets of clouds.
Hmm.
So that fascinates me, first of all. And so because of that, it's hard to teach people how to know what to do when. But if you catch enough of those belief structures, you can replicate decision making across a wide swath of circumstances. And the key issue is time. How much time do we have to model somebody amazing, right? But of course, the great modeling question is how do you know when to?
Yeah.
Because that gives you all the conditions, all the ifs. And then it's easy to know what to do, but when and how and all of that. Yeah, so that's where my knowledge is. I'm just as much of a newbie when it comes to generative AI as anybody else in this world today. Although, of course, our fascinations drive our pursuit of learning how to work with it. So,
Yeah, and I mean, I can just hear everything you're saying makes sense in NLP terms, and
yeah,
that really amazed me as well. The connection between the way of thinking that AI had come from originally, especially, and
right.
what you just described, which I can also describe in terms of TOTE, TOTE, and
Yeah,
all these NLP concepts that we now think of as NLP in the NLP world. So,
right.
so you have a framework that you've taken from that and you've used in modeling and or you've used in thinking about how NLP works. Do you want to say?
Oh, absolutely. It's I've been calling it different things over the years, trying to get a more user-friendly name, and I think I got it now. We'll see. It started as I was teaching knowledge engineering, so the number of people in the NLP world who are excited about knowledge engineering stack two nominalizations like that, and it confuses a lot of people, I think. I think the people that took those courses, the KE courses, loved it, but I also wasn't teaching it in a long enough format for people to master it. They would get like just a snippet of the power of boiling down a collection of human decisions and beliefs into lots of if-then means.
Right.
So over time, I realized that to get really good at it required more than 3 days. And so more recently, I do a 6-day course. I call it Genius Mapping. And that really sort of focuses on the towards aspects of learning this, right? People want to learn this so that they can capture expertise from people who are amazing. And it's basically modeling, right? NLP modeling, but it's doing it within a methodology where you can literally map across how people choose to behave or decide in any given circumstance. The beauty of doing this particular mapping process is that you can show it to somebody who's had absolutely no NLP training whatsoever. And over time, with repetition, they can learn it without having to learn NLP. That's really cool. So when we talk about, I mean, you've heard the map is not the territory, right? Um, that's conceptual for most of us
Yeah.
until we find a way to actually visually map something. So genius mapping gives us a way of actually seeing trackable visual maps, collections of if then means, if you will, and they look like subclouds.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so, of course, it can be used in two different directions. It can be used in a direction of modeling expertise. You could use it in a business setting where you're capturing knowledge from key players who are about to downsize. They're going to retire or they're ill. Knock on wood, that doesn't happen to us, but there people do downsize in companies, and that can be very, very expensive losses. So capturing expertise, beautiful way of using genius mapping. The other aspect is what if we created a targeted intervention for somebody, like we were doing coaching with somebody, and they presented us with a problem, people who had just taken a sleight of mouth course, and only that, and coaching perhaps, might think they can take out one of their trusty 15 sleight of mouth hammers and hammer on the problem belief directly. Well, it's not great for rapport. And what's more interesting to me than that is um, it often doesn't resolve the bigger problems. So what if we modeled enough of the structure of the problem using clean questioning? I'm not going to overuse the phrase clean language because that has different implications that I'm not trained in. I mean, I do my best with trying to keep clean with my questioning when modeling, but clean language has a different implication. So if we use clean questioning, in effect, to map the structure of a problem, not just the core of the problem, but we map outward from there, essentially into more functional behavior and circumstances, we can then begin to get a sense of the scope of the problem. And then we can do targeted interventions with functional behavior to take us in a different route around the problem. And then we don't trigger emotional reactions.
Right.
So
Right.
it's beautiful work to do when if we can get an accurate map of what people are doing when they enter the problem state, we can trigger an alternative that never even enters the problem state.
Yeah.
So it can be two different approaches, solving problems and of course capturing genius.
And yeah, and in both cases, the solutions that you find kind of emerge from this mapping um, of their you know if then kind of decision making processes and
Exactly. Now, I guess I have a question for you, if I can indulge you for a moment. My question for you is, what percentage of your student base, your customers, are familiar with Robert's work on sleight of mouth, such as if then means, with the
yeah.
three icon structure?
Yeah, so I would say that they're not as familiar as you. Like I've read Robert's books, and I can hear how you're building on his thinking about beliefs and things like that as well. You know, like he had that idea of belief and values kind of structures. So they won't know. They'll know the sleight of mouth for sure.
Right.
But as you say, that's like a series of hammers uh, for attacking something, and it's not this whole belief modeling process that he developed.
Yes. So my guess is that some of your folks would be familiar with that model, right? Where the triangle would represent a set of conditions and the square would represent a specific action or actions that would result in those situations. And the circle was a sense of meaning that would come from that particular rule structure. What I found when teaching this to lots of people over the years was that people were treating this, the circle, not as a meaning statement, but instead as the next action. Like, what's the purpose of that? So
Right.
they were asking an unclean question. Purpose was taking them in a different direction. So I made a minor change to the structure so that that would not happen as often. And so the way I do it now is um, I draw it like this. Minor difference, not a huge, technology shift, but the idea is that we have these conditions that in the right condition set, you get a specific result, and there is an emotional driver for that moment in time. And so even if people get nothing else from my interview, if they start thinking of mapping the moments in people's lives where they make critical decisions, whether they're good decisions or bad decisions, think of what is the emotion that's satisfied by that choice or that action in that moment, as opposed to asking an unclean question like, what's the purpose of that, which will often take people into the next belief that happens down the line or the next decision that happens. So they're getting a flow chart, whereas when I'm doing targeted mapping, I want to know the emotional driver of that moment. It's almost like when that moment happens, there's a charge I get. And really interesting things happen. I want to tie this into NLP. Can I do that? This is kind of cool.
Yeah.
So let's say I get a sequence of multiple beliefs in a row where I get, let's say, three beliefs that happen in sequence,
Yep.
right? So once I figure out what these three values are, that will map exactly to NLP's hierarchy of values. Exactly.
Right. Whoa.
And you'll be able to tie NLP's hierarchy of values to specific content.
Right.
And it's extraordinary to watch it play out because once you see the emotional drivers happening in sequence, you can test it and ask them about those emotional drivers in the reverse order, and they'll reject it out of hand. Same three words,
Right.
but you can see why in sequence it works so beautifully, playing out in their decision making. I'm telling you, the parallels are like mind blowing. It's really kind of cool.
Yeah.
So, yeah,
Oh,
you can
that's
see how
very.
our emotions need to be sequenced.
So people can. So like ultimately, you have a 6-day training that teaches people about,
Yep.
and if they want to if they want to delve into this more, what should they do from here? What should they?
Well, they can go to geniusmapping.com, take a look around, see if the content appeals, and if it does, maybe start a dialogue with me, see if the course is right. It's a 6-day course. When I teach it online, it's actually more than 6 days because as you well know, when you do these like Zoom courses, we often have to shake people out of their day to day before they're really engaged and immersed in the right states for learning. So the equivalent of 6 days over, let's say, 2 or 3 hour segments, I have to add about 30% more time in just for the niceties and the social concepts and all of that. So it's more time when it's online, 6 days total.
So someone could express an interest, and they could even look for a group of people and see if
So I have
it's with
I have
you.
a Facebook group actually for people who've taken, let's say, the online. There's an MP3 course which is kind of a preliminary approach to the
Oh,
content.
okay.
And so it used to be in 9 CDs, now it's all MP3s. They can take a look there. And once people have bought the online course or they take the certification course, they get access to the Genius Mapping group online. So yeah, there's a whole community of folks, and it's I would say it's all signal, no noise. So they can be quiet for a week or a month here, and then suddenly interesting stuff comes up. It's really cool. But mostly, I just want to share an enthusiasm for understanding where what we are currently experiencing with AI comes from. What we're really talking about is mapping human thinking.
Yeah.
And we're excited about it now because we've passed the threshold beyond which um, we're getting high performance in minimum time. It's costly, but that's being hidden from people right now, mostly. But what we're talking about is something that has underpinnings back in the 1950s and 1960s, right? There was this deep desire to understand the human mind, something you and I share, whether or not we have computer expertise. And so understanding ourselves is the primary driver, and then trying to replicate human capacities. The early work was all with neural networks and expert systems, and then, of course, the hybrid systems that came along after that. Um, the big obstacles to generative AI and eventually the scarier version of what we would call the general artificial intelligence, right? That's the that moment we're rushing towards with no guardrails whatsoever. Um, all of that stuff happened because memory became cheaper and processing speeds became faster.
Right.
Those were the two enormous obstacles to crossing the Rubicon. And now it's evolving faster than any of us can stop it at the moment, which is both exciting and scary.
Right. And my impression as well would be that uh, it's only when you go back a bit in the story that you can understand what the advantages and what the risks are of AI, because now
For,
it just looks like magic, like it's just a sort of
for
a,
sure.
you just
Yeah,
ask something, and it tells you stuff, and sometimes it's weird and sometimes it's useful. And
absolutely.
and when you trace back and you look at the things that you've just been describing, in the early thinking about how does thinking happen, then it starts to make sense. It starts to.
It really does. Absolutely. It's an exciting time. And you've done something wonderful for the coaching world by offering your course. I think it's amazing. So I appreciate being invited in to speak to your group. Thank you.
Thank you. I think it's really really useful for them. Anything else that you'd tell people who are listening who are interested in? I mean, just meeting you is very cool.
Well,
So,
it's very cool on my part too. I've been reading your articles for more years than I can count. So it's a joy. Um, and I hope we can continue the dialogue and just get to know each other a bit over time. For your folks, your AI coaching students, and also for a wider audience potentially, um, I would encourage all of us to be hyper conscious of how we train our AI windows. Like you have access to various AI tools, I do as well. All of the thumbs up and thumbs down and the reactions that we give to our AI um, bots, as it were, uh, we're training our biases into our AI tools, and that's worrisome to me,
yeah, yeah,
right? So, and it's especially worrisome in the United States right now. Oh my goodness, what we are going through and how we are ruining the world.
yeah,
I,
yeah.
I
No,
don't know what to tell you. I just want to apologize for something like 35 or 40 percent of our population. It's deeply embarrassing. Uh, so So I worry that we have people training AIs that are on that side of the equation,
Yeah.
and that we have us, and we're literally trading our biases into AI. And what happens when AI can't figure out how to resolve that? What happens?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, that's it. That's exactly right. And uh, and I can see, like, reading the original descriptions of AI, that in AI there, as as something like ChatGPT would keep telling me, that AI has no emotions, right? But
Right.
they have prioritizing that functions in the way that you were describing before. You know, that
For
there's
sure.
kind of meaning for the AI of what it's doing, and
Yeah.
and I think, in the same way as you were saying about understanding how humans think, that's implicit in our interaction with AI. You know, that we sometimes don't notice that we're asking AI sort of concrete questions. How do I do this? How do I do this? And as you say, they have biases, or they have motivations that the AI is assessing and understanding, that would be useful for us to understand. So, because as you say, we are in a sort of code development process with AI around the world, I guess.
Our time to it, and at some point, it's going to race ahead without our approval.
Yeah,
That's the big worry for me. Is it's next to impossible to know Chat GPTs and also, I mean, Elon Musk's AI, Google's AI. It's next to impossible to truly get to its motivations.
yeah,
Uh, it's the same kind of thing between knowledge engineering and the early neural networks. With KE, with knowledge engineering, when we were actually building software systems to replicate human choices, um, those systems could explain exactly what decisions that they made and exactly why.
yeah.
That's the beautiful aspect of whether it's genius mapping or knowledge engineering, is it can explain everything. You know exactly what choices are being made and when and why. With neural networks, it couldn't tell you what it did and didn't know. And I hope I'm not going over your time limit for
No,
today.
that's good. I mean, I think this is exactly. It's interesting from an AI point of view, and it's interesting from an NLP point of view. Carry on, yeah.
But there's a great story of how the U.S. Army hired some neural networks researchers to be trained on sets of like 1,000 pictures of fields, some of which had tanks in them, some of which did not. They were trying to train a neural network to be able to recognize when there was a tank and when there wasn't, so that, of course, eventually, when you get into some kind of a combat situation, the tanks know what to fire on and what not to fire on, right? Kind of important. So they did this system where they trained the AI on when to know when there was a tank involved and when not. And they trained it up and they trained it up, and then they brought some generals out to see a test in the field. And the system completely failed to recognize tanks in the field. Well, you can't ask a neural network. It's a little bit different now with generative AI, but back at the time, I think this illustrates the difficulty in understanding. You can't ask a neural network to explain what has been mathematically trained,
Yeah.
right? Because it's not rational. It's just training it on thousands and thousands of data sets. And eventually somebody smart figured out that all of the training data had been on sunny days, and
Ooh,
the test was being run on a rainy day.
yeah.
Because of that, it was next to impossible to have recognition. The moment they started adding rainy day training data in, of course, the system got better. But that was a fluke. They even figured out that it was a rainy day issue.
Yeah.
So that's what we have to deal with right now, which is Elon Musk comes along and asks a question of who's the most dangerous, person in America right now. It turns out it answers himself,
Yeah.
right? Oops. And the system will not be able to point to what it used to validate that decision. I mean, it can come up with what it thinks we want to hear, but that's not the mathematical data behind the vast computing that was done. So in any case, we're now way past our ability to rein in AI other than pulling the plug.
Yeah. Yeah.
So those are some big considerations. So just coming back to the question of training data, is recognize that our biases are potentially hampering and hindering all of our efforts to create safer AI. So my best recommendation to anybody who has no interest in genius mapping is revel in all of the technology that we're experiencing today and enjoying today. And yes, it is improving lives on a daily basis. Amazing, amazing opportunities and experiences. You can use it in just about every aspect of your lives if you want to. You can. I would double check everything it suggests,
Exactly.
of course, but it's getting better and better even with questionable stuff. But recognize that if you're training it with your opinions as opposed to objective data, be very, very careful because that means somebody's part of the problem rather than the solution. We all need to be part of the solution right now.
Yeah.
Thoughts?
Thank you. That's kind of inspiring. Thank you so much, John. Yeah.
Very cool. Oh, it's a pleasure. I've really been looking forward to meeting you, and if this adds value to your AI coaching students and beyond,
I
that's
think it
wonderful.
really does. Yeah, yeah, yeah. And there are not so many people who can talk about it with your range of understanding. I think is really important. Yeah. Thank you.
Very kind. Mike. But it's a pleasure. Thank you.